Hey guys. Alright, today we are going to be watching Why Wasn't Portugal Conquered by Spain by Knowledgia. I don't really know the answer to this. I think the, I guess, kingdom or person that would go on to form Portugal, I think, was once under Castile or Leon. Way back when, maybe. And then something happened and they became separate. And then Spain was its own thing. Well, Castile and Aragon were their own thing. Blah blah blah. As kind of, I guess that's my assumption. Maybe I don't know. I don't know much about Spanish history, so let's go ahead and just dive right in. I still love their animation.
Even if both Portugal and Spain were part of a union at some point,
Yes,
even
they
if
were.
Spain invaded Portugal during the Napoleonic period, the Portuguese lands weren't practically conquered and annexed into the Spanish kingdom. The single mainland neighbor of Portugal is Spain, a much larger country. Some centuries ago, Spain was one of the biggest powers of the world, expanding itself in the New World and in Asia, having large overseas colonies guarded by its incredible armies and navies. Considering their former power, and having a smaller neighbor cornered at the Atlantic coast, we may ask, why wasn't Portugal conquered by Spain? We have to go through some history to answer that. The Iberian Peninsula was known as Hispania, a name given by the Romans. However, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the territory was lost to the tribe of Visigoths, which ended up ruling the whole peninsula, but this was temporary. Their new home will be conquered in the next period by a new force emerging far away. Starting as a religious movement in the hot desert of Arabia, Islam spread rapidly, mainly due to the early military successes against Eastern Romans and Persians. Arab dynasties expanded more and more at a huge rate, reaching the shores of the Atlantic Ocean at the end of the 7th century. In these empires, the religion was embraced by more and more people and became dominant in the caliphates. It is believed that Hispania was one of the former Roman provinces, where the Latin language and culture grew deep roots, and on April 30th, 711, Muslim general Tariq ibn Ziyad landed in Gibraltar. By the end of his campaign, most of the peninsula was brought under Islamic rule. Islam had been present in Hispania since the Umayyad conquest in the 8th century. As in other places of the caliphate, many others embraced Islam. Many Muslims lived in the Iberian Peninsula called Al-Andalus. They were Arabs, Berbers, or local people.
The pronunciation, I think, was a little off, right? I've always heard it was Al-Andalus. Is his closer or is mine? Someone tell me, because I don't know.
Who accepted the religion. Even if the Umayyad dynasty collapsed,
I may have taken
parts
an
of the
Islamic
peninsula
history
were
class,
held by Muslim
we were not
dynasties
taught how
in
to
the next
pronounce things,
centuries,
really.
and the Muslim majority existed more in the Spanish part than in the Portuguese part of land. Being the first nation on the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal emerged earlier than Spain, and it formed as a kingdom in the year of 1128. This happened after winning an important battle, in an effort led by Afonso Henriques, who proclaimed himself King of Portugal in the first half of the 12th century. This was part of Reconquista. He was recognized in 1143 by the King of Leon, Alfonso VII, and in 1179 by the Pope himself. What we know as Spain started with the union of the crowns of Castile and Aragon in 1479, although it was not until 1516 when they had a single unified king. But here is something interesting. In the War of Castilian Succession, Portugal supported Joanna, wife of King Alfonso V of Portugal, and Aragon supported Isabel, wife of Ferdinand, the future king of Ferdinand II of Aragon. We may consider this was a key point in history, because Isabella was recognized as Queen of Castile. If Joanna had won, Portugal and Castile would have been joined together, and Aragon could have remained as an independent kingdom. Until then, the word Hispania was only a geographic location, referring exclusively to the Iberian Peninsula. The Constitution of 1876 adopts for the first time the name Spain. Portugal, Castile, and Aragon were allies in the Reconquista, in which they reconquered land from the Muslim Moors, expanding south of the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal's reconquest was fully achieved by 1249, while Castile finished its reconquest in 1492. Following the first Spanish voyage of Christopher Columbus to the Caribbean in 1492, both states began acquiring territory in the New World. As a result of the 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas, Portugal acquired its most potentially important colony, Brazil. In
definitely the
1578,
most
King
important.
Sebastian of Portugal died
Portugal, at
in the
least.
Battle of Alsacer-Quibir against the Moroccans and the Turks. Having no heirs, the king was succeeded by his great-uncle Henry of Portugal, who reigned until his death. Henry also had no heirs, and his death triggered a great succession crisis, where the main claimants to the Portuguese throne were Philip II of Spain and Anthony, Prior of Credo. After the Spanish victory in the War of Portuguese Succession, Philip of Spain was crowned king in 1581, beginning a personal union between the two nations known as the Iberian Union, generating a decline of the Portuguese Empire during the period of union. The Iberian
Never
Union
really talked
lasted
about
for
the
almost
Iberian
60
Union in
years,
school.
until
I've
1640,
never really
when the
heard about
Portuguese
it.
Restoration War was initiated against Spain, and Portugal re-established the Portuguese dynasty under the Braganza. During the wars of the 18th century, which were often fought by the major powers to maintain European balance of power, even if Spain and Portugal usually found themselves on opposite sides, the Portuguese, courtesy of their long-standing alliance, aligned themselves with Great Britain, while Spain, throughout the Bourbon family compact, allied themselves to France. In 1762, during the 7 Years' War, Spain launched an unsuccessful invasion of Portugal.
Oh, Spain.
In 1777, there was a conflict between the two states over the borders of their possessions in South America. The War of the Oranges happened in 1801, in which Spanish forces, influenced by France, attacked and invaded
damn it,
Portugal.
France.
It was a precursor to the Peninsular Wars, resulting in the Treaty of Badajoz, the loss of Portuguese territory, in particular Olivenza, as well as ultimately
Olivenza is still a town disputed by Portugal and Spain. Portugal does not recognize the Spanish sovereignty over the territory based on its interpretation of the rulings of the 1815 Congress of Vienna.
setting
Interesting.
the stage for the complete invasion of the
A
Iberian
neat little
Peninsula
tidbit there.
by Spanish and French forces. In 1807, the King of Spain and his
So how did
French
they do the
allies
taxes in
invaded
that town?
successfully Portugal. However, the French decided to take over both countries, overthrowing the King of Spain and forcing the Portuguese royal family to escape under the Portuguese colony of Brazil. Spain and Portugal subsequently became allies for the first time in centuries, and allied with the British Army, they managed to get rid of the French by 1813, after a long conflict known as the Peninsula War.
The War of the
France
Peninsula.
did great damage to Spanish and Portuguese economies, but it wasn't just about that. Their reputation was altered too. Both lost their American colony
Intense
shortly
music is
after
playing
the
now.
end of the Peninsular War, which severely weakened their global power. Following their European struggle in which kings were overthrown, their own colonial empires in the New World collapsed. Colonies took profit from the internal problems, and through some independence wars, much of the New World was lost in the next decades. After the fall of Napoleon, both countries came close to war a number of times during the early 19th century. Portugal
like
and Spain
Europeans.
had been rival sea powers as early as the 14th century. Portugal initially was in a position to explore the area as early as the 14th century. Portugal initially was in a position to explore the area facing the Atlantic. In successfully doing so, it discovered that Africa had been the Arab world's major source of gold, brought
Yeah.
by camel caravans across the Sahara. But even if Spain and Portugal were rivals, their focus wasn't on their European lands. During the Age of Discovery, most wealth came from abroad. Both Spain and Portugal were
True.
more concerned
That would
with
be a reason why they
surveying
wouldn't
in
want to
their new
conquer
lands.
each other. There's no point
Trading was
when
a
all the
good
wealth
source
is.
of money. New goods that
In
came from
Africa,
Asia or
Asia,
Americas
and America.
floated the European markets. Also, the huge intake of American gold was important for
And
the
silver.
Spanish economy.
Silver.
To create
Forget
these
silver.
trade
Silver
deals,
mainly.
Spain had to defend
'Cause
their
inflation.
overseas possession. Starting with the 19th century, few plans were created about a possible union between Portugal and Spain. Some tried to spread the idea of Iberism in Portugal, to create 7 confederated republics, 5 in Spain and Lusitania Ulterior, and Lusitania Citerior in Portugal. Both First and Second Spanish republics had plans to invade Portugal, or to create the idea of an Iberian Republic, or an Iberian Union. Even the First Spanish Republic designed a federal constitution to include Portugal. The Second
Man, they
Spanish
really went all
Republic
out.
designed
They
a
had their
plan to
plans.
invade Portugal during the Spanish Civil War. This failed as well. Portugal is mostly a hilly and not a very attractive country to conquer centuries ago, even if there were some little attempts. Of course, there were many important points that could have changed the history of these two countries.
You hear that, Portugal? Yeah, Portuguese people watching? If there are any, they said it, not me. Your country's not attractive. It's too hilly.
Into account the historical context in which both countries were created, and how events played out throughout the many centuries of their existence, the reasons for the fact that Portugal wasn't conquered by Spain are many. The lack of a large interest for this land, the focus on the colonies, the diplomacy of Portugal at some points, the decisions that affected the Iberian Union, or the previous union of Castile and Aragon. The Spanish internal problems as well as other external factors created this situation. If you want to see more videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell button in order to be
Mr.
notified when
Knowledgia.
a new video is uploaded.
All right, that was the, well, somewhat explanation of why Portugal wasn't conquered by Spain. They kind of just gave you the facts and then didn't really, not until at the end here, they kind of explain why a little bit. They sort of started explaining it, they sort of explained it in the last 2 minutes here, with their concluding argument. Like, yeah, for these, all these reasons listed out is why they didn't want to conquer them. There's more money outside of Europe, where they could go for their wealth. They didn't need to conquer Portugal for money. They could just go elsewhere. The terrain of Portugal isn't all that beneficial. So for those two reasons, that's pretty much kind of enough to understand why Portugal wasn't conquered by Spain. One of the other reasons, though, also being that long-standing alliance with Great Britain kind of forced Spain, to kind of, back off. Yeah, I love Knowledgia. They make some good content. They definitely have improved over the years. I think this was not necessarily a weak video. I just think it could have been a little bit more touching up on maybe script. No, I wouldn't say the pacing was bad. I think it was just the placement of certain bits of information, because for a little bit it did feel like we were jumping around in time a lot. Like we were going from the Umayyad Caliphate to Portugal conquering, establishing itself as its own independent kingdom, to the Iberian Union, to Castile, Aragon, and Portugal being all three separate kingdoms in Hispania, So there was a little bit of jumping around, at least that's what it felt like to me. But still, it's a good video. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Leave a suggestion down below for what you want to see me react to next. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.